Welcome to Through the Shadows, Episode 3. Today we're going to talk about my story, The Blades of the South, and Michael's story, A Night in the Factory. But we're going to start with a little bit of a discussion about the struggle to get those words on the page. So, kick us off, Michael. How was your week in writing?
Overall, I think it was a failure again. I didn't write every day. I didn't meet some of our goals, but overall, I got more words than the minimum of the 7,500, and I completed a short story, which is something I haven't done ever as far as we're concerned. So that was exciting and it was fun.
Yeah, that was, I wanted to at least touch on that in some, maybe not in great depth, but in a little bit of depth at least, that for whatever reason, the accountability of having to tape this show pushed us both over the edge, and we were able to create two complete pieces of fiction in a time frame that is much smaller than any other exploits that we have had in the past. So I think when I wrote one or two of the handful of short stories that I have, I might have done them as quickly as a month, but never 2 weeks. I always, and this is a point too that I want to bring up. I was surprised that how we were able to do this, considering also that these weren't stories that we had brooded on for any real length of time, and so yeah, I thought it was great. So anyway, tell us more.
Since you bring it up, from my perspective, I think the interesting thing watching you go through this as well is I remember you spent probably what 2 to 3, maybe 4 weeks just making a map for a story
Yeah,
when we were in college.
yeah,
So I think that's a huge degree of progress for both of us because we did the thing in 2 weeks. Like I've never done that with anything as far as writing is concerned.
yeah. And granted, it was in our sort of in our wheelhouses genre wise, but essentially it could have been any story really. We I think that's the I don't want to say that it's the thing we're trying to sell you here as the viewer, but it is the sort of the product that I hope we can get across, aside from that, we want you to read our stuff, is that anybody could do this. You could, you can just take an idea, and if you force it, and you just make the words go onto the page, shitty as they might be, incoherent as they might be at first, you can craft a unique story based on very little data input and with almost no preparation. And then think about what if you could get that skill down. Imagine what you could do with a map that you intimately drew over the course of 60 hours of work, or if you spent a year thinking about all the ins and outs of a story with that skill set. We've been doing it in the wrong direction all these years. Yeah. We had no writing skills, but we spent all of our time brooding about stories, and so that's the whole idea here. And so it's really awesome to see you sort of cross that threshold and be able to create the product. And so yeah, I was very happy.
Yeah. I'm really proud that I finished a story. And the other interesting thing to note for both of us, I know, looking over the completed product in hand, there's some crappy sentences. It's not a super awesome polished thing, and I don't care. I love it. It's awesome. Like I fell in love with this story in a way that I didn't expect to, given that it was a more or less a throwaway prompt that we chose at random. So I just couldn't be happier.
Yeah, I was also more invested, especially towards the end, than I expected that I was going to be, because as we just said, these weren't stories that were near and dear to our hearts that we had drawn maps for or thought about over time. It was, whatever time that I had to think about it during the week of normal life, just like I said, this week. And yet by the end, I felt the need to connect it in some way to the broader scope of my imagination in ways that I wasn't expecting to, because I very much anticipated this being a disposable type of product where, you know, much like, you know, something you build out of Legos and then you just tear it down and move on to the next thing, and maybe you remember that you built it, maybe you didn't, it doesn't matter. But now, having completed it, I'm happy to add this to the corpus of work that I've already produced, and already it occupies a place that is almost as important as some of the other works that I've done, and I was very surprised by it, that I felt this way, given the short amount of time that I had to really work with the narrative.
Yeah, I agree. So, to bring it kind of full circle, and bring it back towards the beginning here a little bit, I guess. How was your week? How did the process work for you this week compared to my failure of I did it all in a night, basically 2 nights?
Well, I mean, if we were in college and the professor was strict, we would both have gotten zeros. I failed to have my story completed at the deadline. I finished it much earlier this morning. I wasn't up to the 11:30 buzzer like I was the first week, but nonetheless, I was writing this morning and I ended up at 8,200 words, so I went a little bit over, and I did accomplish the goal of making myself write a little bit at the beginning of the week, but then I found that I allowed myself to use that as an excuse to do nothing for the middle, 5 days, and so then I was back in the position where I had just the one day and the whole story had to be finished. And since it ended up going longer than the 7,500 words, it's actually, I think I wrote the same or more in that last day effort than I did the first time. And so, a mixed bag. My goal is to, improve on that. I know we'll probably talk about that at the end of the show as well. But yeah, I would say for me, it wasn't a complete failure, but certainly there's room for improvement in terms of the time management.
Yeah. Which, if nothing else, you don't ever want to just be perfect right out the gate. It'll give you the opportunity to grow and move in ways. So I'm not beating myself up over the fact that I'm still failing at certain elements of this, given the large victories we've had in addition to those failures. So, more specifically, onto your story, I think. This week for the second half, why don't you summarize it? Tell us what it's about.
All right, so I believe where we left off, the main character Mara had just left her everything, her job, her life, and chased the woman in black out of the Turn's Lantern Inn, and chased her down the street, trying to catch up with her, and rounded a corner and turned out she was behind her. Let me pull out the text here. And so the thing that I wanted to accomplish in the second half was to get our main character to the point where she was accepted by the woman in black, because I guess already after the first week, the inklings were there of the desire to have this be more than just one story. And so already my brain was thinking, well, what am I going to do with this character in the long run, whether it be novel or, more short stories or whatever. I'm trying to remember here. So the second half starts where the main character is just kind of reflecting on the fact that she anticipated that after the murder that took place, that the Imperial response would be immense and immediate, and that wasn't the case. And I did I sped time up a little bit and tried to show that she follows her for quite a while, weeks, as she goes from place to place trying to hunt down these people. And I do a little bit of waxing philosophical about how she notices that there are these similarities between the people that the woman in black encounters, and how they sort of grasp onto their power and refuse to relinquish it, and then when challenged it ends up being the wielders of the enchanted weapons who first go to violence. And this continues to radicalize Mara. And then the major plot points of the second half begin when I describe that they have this conversation when they're often in fantasy they set up camp, so I wanted to just to sort of not do that. And so I specifically described that, like, they're not carrying backpacks and shit with tents and sleeping bags, and they're just like hiding somewhere in the forest and leaning up against trees, because number one, they're the predators. So they're in a certain sense, even though we know that there might be an imperial response, they're not anticipating that like robbers are going to find them in the middle of darkness and off of the road in the middle of the forest. And so they have this conversation where they sort of discuss the concept of the enchanted weapons, and then I introduce my second sort of cheesy. First, it was the Blade Hunters, and so then I thought, well, who would be like a super villain version of the enchanted? Who would ascend to the top of that class? And I thought, well, what about the Blade Tyrant? Sort of in homage to Steven Erikson, who had this type of character in his Malazan Book of the Fallen, called I believe the pronunciation was Jaghut Tyrant. Anyway, and so the concept there was just, I tried to illustrate the way that wealth is unfairly captured by the rich in a capitalist system through the example of the weapons, and I showed that there would inevitably end up occasionally being these men in all cases in this world, these men who first they gobble up all the weapons, the shittier ones, and then they start to get an excess of more powerful artifacts. Maybe they start to get armor pieces, other things. They start to double up and triple up on the powers that they have. Then they can start to dole out those items to loyalists, and they can pick which weapons and armors that are most powerful, most useful, most likely to help them continue to maintain power. And when that happens, those men become a Blade Tyrant. They're a concentration of power that the Order of the Purple Rose cannot abide. And so this conversation is where I kind of reveal a little bit more about who the Woman in Black is and what her mission is. And it's a moment where I'm trying to show Mara as wishing to be accepted, and showing that she gets a little bit of that. And then I tried to sort of hammer that home by then doing this thing where I have the Woman in Black ask her to pick up a few things for her when she goes into town to buy the regular supplies that she normally does. And so this is a boon to Mara. She thinks this is great. So she goes and she picks up these items, and I throw in some banter about how she had worried in the past about being left when she went into town. So then when she comes back, the Woman in Black is not there, but Mara knows that something else is going on, and it's the Imperial response. And so I throw in a group of men who are being led by a more powerful enchanted than we've encountered in the story yet, and he has a really cool sword. And Mara sort of sneaks up and sees this, and then it becomes clear that the Woman in Black is going to lose. And Mara's response is to run back to her supplies and pick up this big jug of oil that she had bought because they didn't have any smaller jugs in town, and that's what the Woman in Black had asked for. So she makes a giant Molotov cocktail and then throws that motherfucker at the guy with the cool sword, drenches him in liquid justice, and then the Woman in Black takes him out, and then she engages with these other men, and then I wanted to do kind of at the end of my story, a little flourish, and so I did this sort of attempt at an artsy passage where I I have her, Mara, picks up the sword, and then she has a series of visions, and the result is that the blade becomes black and the lines of magic become purple, and it's clear that it's transformed into this ancient blade Tenguinare, and which is a common name that I've used for sort of a mythical sword of great power in many of my stories. And I show all of these visions of other elements of my fiction, and then and of course the woman in black is screaming for her not to touch the blade, and I hint that the blade might be sentient, sort of a nod to I don't know, I'm blanking. Elric of Melniboné is the story. Michael Moorcock is the author I was looking for. And so I do this flourish. She picks up the blade, and then I guess you could call it the climax of the story, is this moment where then she joins the battle, and they defeat these other men, and then they have a little discussion, and basically even though the woman in black doesn't know what the hell just happened, the result is that, you know, the blade is no longer merely one of these enchanted weapons. It's now clearly something more, something related to the Order of the Purple Rose. And so it's essentially sort of one of these welcome to the order type moments, and then that's kind of where I end the story, is them packing up and walking off to the next battle.
I didn't know. I mean, should we read that paragraph? Because that is one of the ones that I highlighted.
Yeah, I mean, whatever passages that you think, you can either direct me to them, or you can read them, and then I can either re-record it later or whatever.
It's basically near the last page. Paragraph begins. She started as something black, seemed to ooze from the very tip of the sword, like ink at the end of an over-dipped pen.
Ah, very well. Do you want to read it, or shall I?
I did the reading last week, so why don't you take it away?
I'll give it a try. And like I said, if I biff it, I can just do it. If I biff it up, I can just do a re-recording. So she started as something black, seemed to ooze from the very tip of the sword, like ink at the end of an over-dipped pen. Suddenly a flurry of visions came to her. She saw a great tree, leaves of blackest night, and a woman's arms stretched out toward the blackness. She saw a city of gray with an immense statue atop a central spire. Was she holding a tome and blade? She saw a fire which was unquenched by water, which ate at the world like an incurable disease. She saw a world charred and dead. Then a battle of unimaginable scale where gods and men, powers unknown and unexpected, aligned in an ultimate conflict. In the center of the cosmic orchestra of death was that gray city ablaze. She saw deep inside the catacombs of that city, where a massive cavern housed a strange, gelatinous sphere of confusing dimensions. Pardon me. Did I biff in the writing or the reading?
Gelatinous sphere of confusing dimensions was housed. I think you did it in the reading, not in the writing.
Oh well. Mara knew instinctively now, or how important the object was. She knew what horrible depths of meaning were housed beyond its event horizon. She saw a wizard and a knight who battled upon a small span of stone below the sphere. And there were enemies, too many enemies upon them. Dark nothingness and oblivion in their eyes. They were like shadows corrupted in martial form. She saw the last defenders fall.
Yeah, so for me, that was one of the really interesting paragraphs, because I recognize some of the landmarks and some of the implied characters and so forth, but functionally speaking, I think it develops a mythos. If you had never read any other work of yours, it's clear that there's a system or other things in place in this universe that she's connected to through this sword, I think. That's kind of what I get from it. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I see it more in fantasy, I think, than you do in science fiction. But obviously, you put that there. Out of all the things we've written, in this piece, sometimes you just stumble into a good idea and go, okay, yeah, this sounds good, and you just kind of write it. It just comes out. How conceited was this paragraph? Was it intentional from the get-go, or was it something that you kind of stumbled into and then realized I can make these connections? Or
no, it was pure, I guess, serendipity. It was just one of those fun moments where you you know, if you do the work occasionally, you get a moment where it just kind of becomes clear, and you're like, oh yeah, now is the time for the figurative language and the guitar solo, as I've often called it. And so, no, I was well beveraged and well smoked, and the ideas came afloweth, and like I said, I wanted something at the end of the piece that would leave you interested. I wanted to have the last impression be a strong one, and simultaneously, as I said, I wanted, you know, I was so endeared to this story that I wanted to include it in the corpus of work that exists, and so that was the paragraph that resulted.
Yep. And then we'll talk about it here in a bit, but I'll point it out first here. We both used ink pens as an analogy, or ink.
Yeah.
So I realized that just before recording today, so I thought that was funny. But I really like the imagery, the way that you put it there. I like the... If I had never read anything else, what you essentially have here is a list of images. Because, I mean, she's having a vision, so you're not making any sorts of similes or metaphors. But I think it was done really well. I mean, I think there's a way to do this that it works, and there's a way that, you know, it falls flat. And this one worked really well for me. So, I mean, I could belabor that for much longer, but that was really one of the highlights of the story.
I'm really happy that you enjoyed that. It was a sort of a central part of the piece, I thought. And I think it adds weight to the sort of transfer of the weapon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then for me personally, I haven't read anywhere near the amount of Michael Moorcock. So when I think speaking weapons, I think of the strangling cord, Merlin's strangling cord, and
fuck you.
Lasney. Yeah. So that was the connection my mind immediately went to, but I got the feeling that this sword was more or less a malevolent being and not necessarily a neutral, or, you know, so, I mean, when you think of the personality of the weapon, what little there is there, were you aiming for malevolence, or was it meant to be a neutral, like, echo chamber of her own thoughts, or...
So, you know, I wanted there to be the echo chamber of her own thoughts going on, but also I bring in the lady in the lake hands her the weapon. So I mean we do the Excalibur dance, and I replace those characters with my own, and the context is different, but the thing is the same. And so I was hoping to get across more of a duality of potential and less of that the blade is evil. Maybe that wasn't as successful as I had hoped.
Yeah. So overall, for me, this second half worked well. It was entertaining. It had it shifted the pace from the beginning, I suppose. And I think as a whole story, it's important that we don't fall into a trap where you're just hitting the same notes over and over. And so I think, given, you know, our experience together, I really enjoyed this. I mean, it's a surprisingly complete, cohesive whole for, you know, essentially smashing it out in a couple of days over the course of 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. Which brings me back to the more the point here. How do you think the process of the writing went this week? I know we talked a little bit about, you know, how we failed, but what did you learn, I guess? What was your process at the start? You know, what can we draw for next week from the experience we've had with this story?
I found that when I was trying to sort of separate it from everything else that we've done over the years, that it was much slower, because all the ideas and the characters and the places and the images and everything that we've come up with over all of the years that we've been chatting, they're not as separable as I think we like to pretend. from who we are as writers, and I resisted that the compulsion to include those things in the first half, and I realized that as soon as I decided that that was no longer an issue, and I embraced these new characters and brought them into the fold, then it became much easier because I looked at Mara and I said, well, much like I did with the Woman in Black, it was when I decided that, oh, well, it's the Order of the Purple Rose, which is a construct from a novel, an unfinished novel that I was working on. Then that kind of got the first half going, and when I decided, well, I'm going to give her this Blade Tenguinare and sort of have her ascend to this position of being within the order, and but also possessing this more powerful, this artifact weapon that is also now in the service of this group that is generally opposed to such objects and their influence. I thought that was, for me, that made the words come out much faster than if I had been intentionally avoiding any concept that was connected to my previous work. So that was probably my biggest leap forward. I don't know if that answers your question.
It kind of makes sense, because I mean, if all of these previous things that you've worked on that we've discussed over the years and so on, that's just the natural outbursts of your imagination and of your desires and so forth. And I think the more cagey that we try to be, you're not just, in a sense, we're not just protecting those previous ideas, but you're actually kind of locking off your creativity. You're locking off
I might be protecting the ideas from ever getting a chance to live. You know?
Yeah. And it's a weird impulse that I think writers generally have, or I mean, maybe more just generally artists of all kinds. But I know every person I've met who's a writer is really, really cagey and doesn't want to share anything about their stories until it's complete and done, and then you can just hand them the paper and say, yeah, here, read it.
Yeah, but even then, they don't want to talk about the background stuff. There's always the stories that are the special ones that if anybody found out about and stole, then I would just be over, because I could never come up with anything that good again. Types.
Or
everybody has those.
I was gonna say, or you might have the misfortune of dying and having your children publish them posthumously.
Right, there's that too.
So, anyhow, a little dig at Tolkien here, but I think for me, one of the last questions I had, I'm gonna nitpick on a technical point. I think, did you struggle with the dialogue in this second half?
No.
No. Okay.
I tend to not struggle with dialogue.
Yeah.
Did you?
I just pointed out.
Did you fathom that I struggled with the dialogue?
I thought you might have.
Interesting.
Which was, for me, interesting, because as you pointed out, you're normally very good at dialogue. That's usually my weak point. And there was a page or two where when you were trying to draw her out and get them talking, you just kept saying, oh, she was silent for a long time. Oh, she was silent for a long time. And so I wondered if that was sort of a knee-jerk while you were typing, you were just trying to decide, like, oh, what is she going to say next? And
interesting. No. I mean, it sounds like to me that just one of the things I tried didn't land. I wanted this kind of pitch black atmosphere where, Mara is trying to be conversational because it's dark, but it's early in the day, and they're bored, and she knows the Woman in Black isn't sleeping. And yet, she asks questions, and they sit there for a while. And so I'm trying to create that, and I guess from what you're saying, it doesn't land. It doesn't. It comes off as is it too packed together? Like I reference it too many times in a short.
Yeah, I think hindsight's 2020. Where your editor, your revising partner, as I may end up being. Instead of just saying, oh yeah, she was silent for a spell or what have you, you could even literally just be describing how she's playing in the dirt with a stick or something, and just the words on the page could create that space without actually having to say she was silent before she responded. But I mean, otherwise, like, it didn't hurt the story at all. It just, pinged in my brain like, oh, maybe you were struggling to get the dialogue moving. So interesting, I thought. The final note I had for me was like, where did the idea of the giant Molotov cocktail come from? Like, it was unexpected.
Well, what do you mean? Where did it come from, comrade?
Yeah. I don't know. I just of all the ways that I would have attacked, some crazed knight with an enchanted weapon, like giant jug of oil probably would not have occurred to me.
Well, I mean, isn't that a good thing?
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm not knocking it. I just
So
thought
I
it was
mean,
kinda...
that's my here's my question: did it come off as like super cheesy, or could you mostly buy into it?
No, I mean, I think for it to be cheesy, it would have to be like an overdone expectation or something. You know what I mean? Like it was for me. It was just so left field because I don't think I've ever really read in any fantasy someone just like spontaneously creating a Molotov cocktail like that.
Well, no, but you will hear about it if you read a lot of anarchist fiction, or anarchist news, or documents about anarchism. So I mean, what I was channeling there was, she finds an enemy who represents the state, and she burns him down with a Molotov cocktail.
Excellent. And I feel stupid hearing you talk about
and then her blade turns into the colors of the anarcho-feminism flag. And like, I'm not trying to be subtle at all. This is propaganda.
Yeah. Well, what I thought was funny is hearing you talk about it now, and how you're talking about how the hoarding of the weapons was representative of economy and of money and the way wealth gets gathered like that. I immediately just went, oh yeah, duh. Like when I was reading the story, that didn't
But
occur.
it didn't feel like I was hammering you in the face with it, because that's how I was sort of writing it.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
I was gonna say some of it, yes. Some of it, given our recent political talks and such, it was like, okay, this is anarchy.
Well, but do
like,
you think the average person would have had that?
No, I don't think so.
I think that's cool, because it means that I can be a little bit more free. Because I thought that you were going to come to me and say, ha ha ha, but that was way too over the top, or way too cheesy, or it was... I was afraid that you were going to just say some criticism of to the effect of like you were ham-fisted and overdone with your ideological content to the point where the story sucks.
Yeah, but you know what? Like when I compare it to other fantasy I've read and to even a lot of the sci-fi I've read, there's a lot of stories and a lot of novels where they're just way more ham-fisted. Like they're just really indelicate and blatant about it. And honestly, like I think of immediately I think of the what was it? The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. I just read it this year, and it's like almost intentionally it was a political manifesto, if I remember right. Like I don't know if that was his actual goal, but that's how people read it now. Is it's all about this particular political perspective and so on.
And I mean, I said so in the second episode. I was exploring the idea of political violence, and the main character is a woman of roughly my age who makes her living doing something that's pretty similar to what I spent a lot of my time doing. And she gets radicalized by seeing somebody not just speak truth to power or be an activist against an evil that somebody's doing, but actually just step in and say, relinquish your control on these people or I will take it from you. And then doing so, that radicalizes her. And then when she is put in a position where she has to choose to go all in on that choice, or she has the option to escape home, but then this powerful person, she's going to have to know that her choice led to that person getting rolled over by the patriarchy. In that time, she chooses to take up the ancestral weapon of comrades, the Molotov cocktail, and fucking blasts that guy right in the nuts with it, and takes his fucking weapon and turns it into the black and purple, and
Now, if you wanted to be heavy-handed,
I thought I was trying to just flop it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you were, but it works because I think that's fitting for science fiction and fantasy. It's common, you see it a lot. And it becomes sort of I don't know if standard fare is the right word, but that's a thing that I guess I expect when I read fantasy and science fiction. Um, so it didn't stand out in a negative way. If you had wanted it to, however, you would have made her do it with a bottle of like potato vodka or something. You know what I mean? Like then I think it might have crossed the line into like, okay, this is cheesy and bad. But in the narrative and the story itself, it worked out. I thought it was funny. I didn't know if the anarchy thing was the Molotov or the reason for that, or if it was just a creative way to down the night, or if it was maybe a bit of Dark Souls creeping in. I don't know.
No, it's yeah. I mean, there's that too, but it's 100% that for me, I am interested in creating fantasy that addresses the current political climate, and I'm interested in exploring anarchism through my fantasy fiction as one of my heroes, Ursula Le Guin, did. And so, yeah, I'm doing that here, and you don't have to do that. You don't have to agree with me ideologically to listen to us talk about these stories and copy the elements of what we're talking about to try and create your own narratives. I'm hoping at least that we can appeal to people from many different ideological backgrounds, you know, generally. But
Yeah.
I want to do
So
I want to do a hard left turn here in the interest of time. And
Yeah,
I mean, is there any closing words you want to say about my piece, or well, at least give it your rating and
Yeah, for me, at least in its rough state here, I'd say it's an easy 6 or 7 out of 9 Amberites. Like I really enjoyed it. I think it has potential. It's an already I can see how it fits into our into your mythos, into your world, and so I think it could be. Honestly, both of these I'm excited. I think they could be published. I think we could polish them up in a later video in 6 months, a year, or whatever, and try to get them published.
cool.
Maybe I'll say that about everything we write, though. Maybe we're just that good, or maybe we're that
Well,
egotistical.
I love the 6 or 7 Amberites, and now on to I hope that this will not be a sour note on the video, but I will say right off the bat that I thought that your first half was far superior to your second half.
Yeah.
And so I remember last week talking about how even though I knew that you had rushed, that I didn't read the rush, here I read it and it feels rushed. It feels much more cobbled together. Unfortunately, there are some continuity issues where sometimes I didn't really understand where I was or which events had happened and which hadn't.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a little problematic. So let's begin with your summary, and then I will tell you how close my interpretation was, having read it once, from your summary. And then there's lots of good to talk about as well.
Yeah, so ultimately, last time we left off with Sophie and Gavin talking, and he said, I'm afraid that they're going to kill me. And
Sophie is the worker, the cleanup person, and Gavin is the AI.
Yep, that's correct. And then the very last part of last week was she was coming into this office to have this meeting with at that time an unnamed character who I'm calling now Mr. Dillard, or Edgar Dillard. So that first part, that meeting continues rather in the opening of this week's writing, wherein this higher exec of Nebula status, basically he fires her. He tells her, you done screwed up. You don't really understand the powers you're messing with here. You're lucky that we're not, suing you into oblivion. That may yet come. You're lucky that the Alliance, though, just the nebulous government name I assigned, doesn't try you for treason and yada yada. So she gets angry, essentially throws a fit, and has to be literally dragged kicking and screaming out of the office by this security drone. I then kind of did a flashback sequence to... Unfortunately, I wish I'd outlined it better from the get-go, because I was trying to cover what I felt was a gap. So I flash back to the second half of that conversation after he says, "I'm afraid they're going to kill me," and they then have this conversation where he talks about having overheard the programmers and the engineers talking about, something's gone wrong. We don't think he can fulfill the program anymore, etc. And he eavesdrops on them essentially and finds out that it all boils down to this database from the beginning and how they feel it corrupted him. Um, they then realize that what the corporation wanted was a brainwashed, loyal, and obedient dog or slave of some nature with all of the benefits of a fully thinking, sentient being, but of one that was, uh, you know, absolutely loyal to the state or absolutely loyal to the company. However, this database opened him to other possibilities, opened him to a world of love and art and so forth. So it corrupted him. From there, I go back to Mr. Dillard, and he's having a meeting with a nebulous secret agent type person who I just kind of named John Shaw. I couldn't come up with anything better. And this person threatens Dillard and says, if you can't get this project under wraps, we're going to kill you or torture you or you're going to disappear into the night. Other things are implied. After that, Sophie makes her escape. We see her disable the droid. She goes to and rescues Gavin and tries to leave this asteroid Juno in general, wherein she has the final boss battle and she gets shot, but it's revealed that all of her escape was more or less a show, a distraction to allow Gavin time to interface with the networks of the asteroid and the greater solar network in general and escape the bounds of the corporation. So I hope that worked. I hope it came across that way. But apparently there were some failings. So tell me about that.
I think the flashback was the part that must have tripped me up. So either it wasn't set up correctly, or in any event, yes, because the flashback part, some things happen, and then you describe basically the same things happening again, or it jumps forward. And anyway, it was confusing. So in editing, I would have pretty harshly wanted you to probably cut that whole part out and rewrite it and whatever. But that's not our purpose here. As a unit, I thought that the second half began fairly strong, and then there was a sort of a train wreck area, and then it ended strong. Again, I very much liked the Shaw character. I liked the idea that they just openly use that name, and you word it as it simultaneously is this wall of impenetrable secrecy, but also a grandstanding sort of display of power, because they list it in the open on all the logs, but yet nobody can find out exactly who it is, and it's you allude to the to this alliance superstructure that is on top of the narrative, and I'm a sucker for for that type of thing, the continuity between stories, between works, and so I'm happy with the number of different sort of roads that you created with this story that you can explore at your leisure in future content. I want to know more about the Alliance. I want to know more. You have the cool black ship that comes in, and the the tone of the story is such that when all of a sudden you have this guy just shoot the protagonist, it's quite sudden. And even though you don't really describe a whole lot about it, you do a little flourish where you describe the bullet and the way that it impacts, and I wasn't super stoked on that. But it was there. I mean, it was cogent. But you don't do a whole lot of description, but it's weighty. It's heavy in the narrative, because there isn't any other real violence aside from maybe the little bit when the guard robots grab her. And so I enjoyed that. Um, the very ending, the last line where she wakes up later in a hospital. Yeah, I guess I like that. I assumed that was a product of had to get it done.
I think
had to sort of close it off.
there were some parts here where what I had outlined, there were additional scenes, and they had to kind of get combined because there were a few things I was trying to do. So like that conversation with Gavin, I was actually originally going to just write a scene where he overhears them and comes to these conclusions sort of his own at that time, rather than him reporting it to Sophie after the fact as part of this conversation and so on. And so like that had to be combined. And yeah, there was a lot of ways where it didn't turn out the way I wanted, but the violence, I realized as I was outlining it, my first knee jerk was, oh yeah, she's going to, knock out some human guard and she's going to fight this other guard and do this. And I realized, she's just like a mechanic or something. Like, she's not a fighter. She's not a trained anything, really.
Right.
Like, does it really make any kind of sense that she's going to do this? And then, like, duh, hello, sci-fi author, So I thought the switching it to a droid that she could disable with her skill set as opposed to having to...
No, I thought that was suitably clever. You came up with, I think, a good way to sort of handle the issue of that your construction of the story necessitated you to come up... Excuse me. You had to come up with some kind of scheme. And I mean, you essentially did. Granted, you did utilize the age-old, look over here. Nope, it was really over here. But that's fine for a first effort. I wouldn't say that the construction of my story was any more or less creative. I think the creativity came in where, as I said, the Shaw was a strong point. Your use of the violence, I think, was very productive. We just spent a considerable amount of time flogging R.F. Kuang's The Poppy War for her use of violence as being, to our eyes, mostly unproductive. And so I think probably this week we were both very concerned with making sure that the violence actually served our purpose as opposed to just being needless and for the sake of it being there. And so, no, I thought it was well done. And I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but the story leaves me with a lot of questions that are what I would deem non-frustrating questions. So if I was still asking, things that were integral to the narrative of the short story itself, that would be bad for sure. If I still didn't know who the main character was, or if they were a good guy or bad guy, or any of those things. I mean, I guess maybe it doesn't need to be that black and white, but I think you understand what I mean. I didn't have any of those questions where it was like, oh, the story is ruined because they didn't even tell me if the main character survived. You didn't do anything like that, but you left me with a lot of these questions, such as if they were threatening to kill her mob style for just interfering with the project, and that was treason, and that the Alliance might kill her for it. What are they going to do now that she has released this thing entirely? And he even fucking does the Kenobi, and he's like, yeah, now I'm more powerful than you can possibly imagine.
I didn't even realize I did that, but yeah.
And so, that makes me, I want to know, well, what's going to go on with this AI? Are you going to write a story in the future that's just about this AI expanding? Is there going to be a whole, section of space that Gavin has taken over, and, he's some kind of supervillain in some other stories that you have? I have lots of questions like that. It makes me, or at least this is my intuition, I feel like the story was good at making me buy into the brand of Michael stories, even if it does have some failings at the paragraph or sentence level. So my quote of the week is on the second page, Um, it is the paragraph, "The ember flared."
Yep, I know right where you're at.
So if you want to just read that one out, read that paragraph out for us.
Okay. The ember flared and her heart began to pump lava through her veins. She was on her feet in a second, shouting obscenities at him. She would have hit him if she could, but she couldn't reach him across the desk. No longer thinking, she began to climb onto his desk, narrowing the distance between them. A bizarrely calm voice in her mind lamented the fact that she hadn't brought anything she could use as a weapon. She envisioned launching herself from the desk surface at him, latching onto his throat, landing squarely on top of him as they hit the floor, and throttling the smug, entitled life out of him.
Yeah, particularly that last line, "throttling the smug, entitled life out of him," was, you know, as the guy that just wrote the Molotov throwing barmaid gone anarcho-feminist warrior. I can totally buy into the working 9 to 5. I can get into it, man.
Well, and what's funny is, I forgot to point it out, but you had this great line where the woman in black in your story thinks something to the effect of, like, you out-crazied the crazy woman, you know?
Right.
So, like, I guess this was my moment where, like, yeah, she went crazy.
Yeah, and so maybe the word desk is in there one time more than I would have put, and maybe there's some adjective choices that could have been changed, but generally I thought that was a strong paragraph, and I thought it was a really good one for the character, because again, you intimate violence, but you don't do it yet. And so really the only violence that actually happens in the story are the powerful I guess like state or corporate figure shooting the defenseless woman. And so I mean I assume that violence plays into your ideological narrative that what's important is the relationship between this powerless woman and this very powerful AI, and the interceding forces of the corporate and the alliance are the negative things that are lamentable in the story, not the existence of the AI or the potential for it to be alive. And you also, whether by choice or, you know, by error or just by negligence or whatever, I don't know, what you don't even have to say, but by not addressing at all whether or not the AI is actually dangerous, I thought it made the narrative stronger. Because you don't actually really talk about what Gavin wants a whole lot, or what he might do, or what you never actually do tell us. I guess this is a criticism. You never actually tell us for sure what he was supposed to be for, do you?
No, I just kind of imply it. I was hoping I thought the best part of it was his conversations with her, where they realized that, like, he wants to be his own individual and he doesn't want to be a blind, loyal, so on. I was hoping that I implied in there somewhere, I can't remember specifically, I was looking at it, I was hoping that it was implied that what they were trying to create was a sentience that they could use in many situations that was blindly loyal to whatever the state wanted. So imagine sophisticated, you know, solar weapons that
yeah.
Are,
so I mean, I guess in that sense,
and,
you do tell us. I guess I would take that back. You sufficiently explain it.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, that was my favorite quote, and I guess overall, I would have to rate it. I would probably put the second half closer to like a 6, and the first half definitely a strong 7. So like maybe a 6.5 overall, which I think, again, for a first effort on prompts that were they were written by opposites, right? I wrote your prompt, essentially. Yeah, I think it was a great effort from both of us. So is there anywhere else you want to draw our attention in your story, or any other elements of it that you wanted to talk about that you thought would be instructive for the audience? Or
I actually did just want to point out the my ink metaphor here, where I was talking about how, you know, essentially, I thought that for me, if I was going to pick any quote, it was going to be that one or the paragraph that starts all the vivid paintings, where I have this really cool imagery of him summoning this holographic art in the hallway.
Well, give us that quotation then.
Which would you prefer, the ink or the paintings? Because I think we should limit it to the one.
Let's do the ink then.
Okay. So this is when he's telling her about overhearing the programmers. And he says, they use terms like corruption and virus to describe the cascade of changes that followed, almost as though this database were actually infectious and some kind of evil spread over and through me. Like a bottle of ink spilled onto an open book, first blotting out only the words on the surface, but then seeping through the pages and into the binding, where once raw data existed, now only the dark Rorschach blots and the shapes of Debussy and Hemingway remain.
Debussy.
I know how to write it if I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, a lovely quote, I think. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a great deal of commentary on it. The quote that I chose was more connected to what I wanted to talk about in the piece, but certainly that quote is a more powerful example of writing prowess than the one that I selected. But as I said, just maybe not as connected to what I was wanting to talk about with your piece. But yeah, that's a great quote, a fun passage, and yeah, as you said, really funny that both of us had ink references in the ends of at the end of both of our stories, and pretty important parts of the story as well.
Yeah. So I think to bring it kind of to the point of the channel, as it were, the process for me, I think I did learn that when I've been doing outlines in the past, which is something I almost never did anyway, I wasn't doing them the right way. This week, the thing that I did learn that I found to be productive was that when I wrote the outline, I was envisioning it more as a storyboard or more as something of a script and less of a collection of ideas. And usually my outlines were more along the lines of, here's this idea, and then underneath it would be things that might help that idea, but it was never so cohesive as like a strict event follows event and a plot of what came where.
Yeah.
Because that's what I always struggle with in my writing, is trying to figure out where to go next. So that helped, but where I struggled, where a lot of, I think, the problems in the story came out, was that I rushed, I waited till the last minute, I had these other failings. So the overall experience is that I think if I can be better about the time management of the writing itself, if I can continue to plan it out well with this outline, it will help in the future to actually write a cohesive story without the continuity errors, and in a way where I'm not just bashing my face going, where do I go next? Where do I go next?
Right.
So that was my big lesson, for me, anyhow.
Yeah, I think that's a good takeaway. If you are struggling to write stories, then the two biggest pieces of advice we can offer so far are try outlining as he just laid out, and try to force yourself to, even if it's 15 minutes a day, try and front load the writing as much as you can for the week. If you want to write 5,000 words in the week, don't expect that you're going to be able to just stay up all night writing the last day over and over and over and over. Because I can say, at least in our experience, that has created some drama. Because it effectively just eats the second half of Thursday and all of Friday. And it's ultimately it's pretty inefficient, even though so far we've been able to do it. So that'll be the big question, is can we incorporate the tactics and the ideas that we're learning through the process, but then also move forward on the stuff that we already know that's true. Like, you should write every day, not just in giant chunks, and etc. So, having said that, having gone over both of these first two stories, we need to select what we're going to do for our second story, which I'm thrilled that we get to do that. That it wasn't a complete failure. That we actually did complete the stories. So, last time we had each person wrote 3 prompts in the opposing person's genre, and that person had to select one. So this time, we each wrote 3 prompts for ourselves in our own genre, and then we're going to share them, and then the other person is going to select the one that we write out of the 3 that we came up with. And so, still a little bit of a sort of game show-ish, cheesy type little element to it that I think is fun, and that I think, the more that I think about it, it's kind of a necessary part of this process, because we already know that the systems that we used in the past don't work. And so the slight uncertainty and the forcing oneself to just take an idea, a new idea, or one that you haven't ruminated on for a great deal of time, and then just being forced to write that story, I think that is proving to be effective in terms of producing nuggets of information that we can share with the viewers. And so in that spirit, as I said, we both have our prompts. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can.
As I flounder around trying to find my printout.
So the first idea I had this week was for my next story is where I'm envisioning something about a colony on Europa. Now, if you're not aware, Europa is a moon in the solar system that is mostly covered in ice, but they believe the interior of it is a liquid water ocean. So I was thinking about what if I focus on this setting where it's a sci-fi colony that exists solely under the water in this ocean beneath the ice of Europa. I don't really know what the story or the plot would be. I just like that idea as the setting, because I've never done anything, submersible. It's always been spacecraft and lasers and so on. So I think
it still could be spaceshipy type stuff with laser beams and...
Yeah, I just think it presents an interesting new environment that I've never worked with before, and I thought that'd be kind of fun and kind of cool. Whatever the story ends up being, but that's
we'd probably, if we choose that one, we would want to probably specify some narrative parameters, because I think that might be a little bit too loose. I worry that you might get writer's block just because of possibility paralysis.
Yeah.
So, but no, that's an intriguing idea. I can imagine you doing, because if they're breathing, I would assume they're harvesting oxygen from the water, and that you could certainly deal with that as a resource that people fight over, or that, or you could just take any other story and now it's underwater in Europa.
Yeah, I was envisioning. I mean, if you've seen the movie Abyss, I always liked that movie as a kid, and so like I was envisioning these really cool scenes where you have hydroponic farms where there's pressure issues of the water coming in or out, or people running through the water processing plants that produce the air and so forth, or cool like underwater submersible battles. I mean, like, I don't know, like the sky's the limit, whereas I've just never read that type of thing yet. So insert story here, but I was excited about that setting.
I like that. All right, my first prompt is, and full disclosure, I keep a running list of general story ideas that I've had going for years, and one of the place that I pulled, I think 2 of these from, was a modification on a basic idea from that list. So I won't be able to claim pure newness to these ideas as I did with last week's, but I'm not overly concerned with that. So the first idea is the most common, I think, of the 3 that I've seen in other types of fiction, but I called it like the gift finders. Because I watched a YouTube video a while back where the guy said something to the effect of, I believe everyone on the planet has a gift. It's your job to find out what it is. And I think he was talking about sort of the general inspirational, like you have to find what your gift is, and then everybody's a master level something. You just have to, if you get lucky enough to figure out what you're the best at, then you get to be the best. And Anyway, but I thought, well, what if there was other people that that was what their job was? Maybe like that group on the NBC, the Heroes show, kind of where they find all these people with special powers, or X-Men, those types of things come to mind. But I was thinking more precisely this, like maybe a group of monks that go and find kids who could do magic, or I know that's been done too, but again, that's the basic premise, is write some kind of a story incorporating an organization, a person, a group, whatever, that finds people or takes anyone and finds what they're the most gifted at. So
Yeah, it reminds me of Piers Anthony's Xanth universe.
okay, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I certainly didn't invent the concept.
No, but I was already liking it, and I was thinking, like, if you even wanted to play with the time period a bit, I could envision almost like just a really funny, like, DMV style situation where people wait in line and they have to go up to the desk and fill out forms.
Oh, it could be dystopian even, yeah.
Yeah, like it would be a really funny kind of take on that. But there's this great book called The Machine of Death, where they take this one concept and
Yes,
write
you have
multiple.
always liked this story.
I immediately think of, with this idea of yours, the story you could write is the way in which these gift finders have corrupted the system. I think that could be really interesting.
Yeah, that could be cool. Or I was just thinking, what if it was kind of even if I kept to the fantasy standard of sort of the medieval, what if it was a DMV style thing where everyone came through and got their deal, and maybe it's a completely non-magic world, and you go through and they tell you what you're the best at, sculptor, painter.
I'm envisioning
it just says magic.
I'm envisioning it could be a summer celebration where every year all of the children who turn 10 or 15 or whatever meet at the feudal lord's castle for this big ceremony where
Right, all the kids put the hat on and it tells you if you're in Gryffindor or...
Yeah. So yeah, I could be interesting. So I like that idea.
Yeah.
My second prompt, and again, sort of as you pointed out, the caveat here is Whitney helped me come up with one of them, and then I think the other one was we just kind of Googled some prompts and
well,
played
I'm
with
not
them.
thrilled with the third-party input. That's kind of cheating, but...
Well, to be fair, she offered a set of ideas, and then I took that from there.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess however you get there.
Yeah, so this one it came from that sort of, but what I settled on was this idea of a human colony struggling to adapt the pollinators that they brought with them, perhaps bees or some other type of insect, to the ecology of the new homeworld where they're trying to set up their colony. And so the conflict of the story is that the entire colony is in danger because they can't figure out how to get the plants to grow and this and that, and I thought that could be kind of interesting.
Yeah, it does have the problem of putting you in a similar position to your last story, where you have to just nebulously come up with something clever because how do they resolve it? What's the real problem? Those are, you just kind of have to come up with that, and they need to be cool, otherwise the story sucks. So, but yeah, that's kind of I would say all of the prompts that we've done so far, I would put in the easy category. I would say that one's like a extra hard. I don't think that would be an easy.
I think I keyed on it because I liked the idea that it could be concurrent to like climate change debate. And
that's what I'm saying. I think the ideology would be strong there. There's going to be a lot of moving parts. It's also about bugs, which is pretty boring. So
yeah.
It presents logistical and narrative challenges that I don't think a lot of our ideas for prompts have had so far.
It wouldn't have to be about bugs, but it could be that like the solution is they find out like, oh, this is why all this crap is going wrong, is because the bees aren't working. But yeah, like
that could be cool.
There would be some element of it that would be probably bogged down with like entomology or some other boring crap.
But on the plus side, it's very different from anything you've written before, so you might find that it creates completely new avenues of thought. So yeah, let's see. I'll keep that one, in mind. So my second one then is do a story where a young girl is taught magic by her mother and father, even though it is forbidden in their religion. As sort of an analog to there's a documentary about jihad. It's called Jihad on Netflix, and I've also been fascinated with the way that music is viewed throughout the world. Like some cultures just don't like music at all. Even within the Judeo-Christian tradition, different groups among Christians have different standards for, is music allowed in church? Is it not? Is music frowned upon generally or not? And so then I thought, what if magic was an analog to that? And of course, we know about the long standing history of religions responding very poorly to witchcraft. And so I thought, maybe that would be a fun, it's whereas the one you just laid out was I would argue a pretty difficult prompt. I would put this in the category of like super easy, because it's kind of open-ended and it's a very common, I could go the very traditional like Salem witch analog route there, but I also thought that maybe it would be an opportunity where I could easily go a completely different direction and explore maybe. My gut reaction would be to try and incorporate some exploration of trying to analyze Christian values in terms of replacing the ideology of that the world is there for our consumption with the idea that the world and nature, the flora and fauna, that we are their stewards. And I think that could be really interesting via introducing sort of a druidic magic element. And then I could talk about how they, the dad teaches her in the basement, and then maybe there's a priest that finds out and he ends up being the bad guy, and there's a little quasi-violent, domestic style disturbance that's one of the high points of the story. I could see going that route, or as I said, I could go the more traditional route of like, you're a wizard, Harry, and I'm gonna teach you the fireballs in the basement, but don't tell the priest because then they'll burn us. That's or maybe anyway. I could sit here and come up with ideas all day on that one. So that's why I would say it's an easy prompt.
I like the druidic bit, but maybe because you front-loaded it by talking about music, I couldn't help but think of Elvis and how historically, like, there was this period where rock music was the devil's music, and how they talked about his bewitching hips and things of that nature. And so, of course, I thought of Nazareth too.
Yeah,
Dr. Peter Nazareth. Isn't he one of the eminent scholars, if not literally?
I believe he is the eminent
for Elvis studies. So, anyhow, I couldn't help with that connection. So I was thinking, what about a druidic magic that's music based? And so you could look at, with our little bit of knowledge of how the church has resisted the secularization of music throughout its history, you could kind of play with that and make it maybe a more direct connection. I like that idea. I think that could be a lot of fun. It could be really interesting to read.
Yeah, that's an idea. Of course, you only get to pick the prompt. You don't get to pick how I interpret the prompt. But yeah, that's an idea.
That doesn't mean that I can't, secretly feed some quarters into the machine and hope I.
Oh yeah, definitely. Pump quarters in at your leisure. All right, in the interest of time, hit me with your final prompt. So my recap for me. We have the bees, what was the first one?
The underwater civilization.
Yes, Europa. So Europa, the bees, or
this one, it started with an internet prompt, but it kind of plays off a lot of the things that I've liked in the past, and I think maybe this underwater civilization idea and pop movies, I think it's kind of the more complete of all the three. I'm envisioning a near future Earth, in which a like a mining mogul type person uh, builds some kind of machine or vehicle to go exploring the crust of the earth and digging very deep and going into the earth, wherein he discovers these giant, vast crystal caverns that we know already exist, but he realizes that you can use these crystals to power a new clean energy source. So he starts mining them and selling them, only to find that there's some sort of great dire consequence to mining the crystals.
Okay. That's not so different from the way that I have characterized mana in some of my recent work. And so I like the parallel, because as full disclosure to the audience, we've been in talks for years about just having like a generalized narrative universe that we both write in. And I mean, I don't want to overshare, but I think we pretty much about a year ago codified that into an actual thing that we could name if we so chose. And so this would be the type of story that would easily fit into that, to that scheme. Yeah, I like that. I won't say any more, because I had thought about maybe just offering my pick now, but I'll think about it while I share my last one, and then I'll pick. So my last one is also probably the most complete, I guess, out of the three blurbs that I wrote here. So I just called it Tree People. So this one would be about a tribe of people who exist in a really specific type of harmony with a type of tree. They would worship them. They would they'd live around them, and they would use the wood, but only for very specific, sentimental, sort of spiritual, elements of their culture. And I'd explore the possibility through the story that we can be connected to nature at a level that isn't so different from magic. In this case, maybe it's actually magic. And then I envision the concept being that maybe each person in the tribe, when they die, they become a tree. And so they would have these vast, copse of trees. And then I thought maybe in this narrative I could get some of my desire for eco criticism in there, and then also explore this idea of what if there was a logging company or some other interest that wanted to come in and was trying to cut down these trees, and that could be sort of the struggle, is how they deal with that. I fear that the Molotov cocktail might make a recurring appearance if you were to choose this one. But otherwise, I have considered writing this type of story for a long time, and so I put it on there in the thinking that if you so chose it would be the jump start I needed to actually just get this thing written.
So don't take it negatively, but are we talking Tony remakes Fern Gully?
I wish. I would love to get to that level. Fern Gully was great.
I just, what you're sitting there with, like, oh, this company comes in and they're trying to harvest the spirit trees and da.
Ooh,
like,
yeah.
Yeah, like, it's kind of Fern Gully-y.
I dig Fern Gully,
yeah.
And I dig artistic theft, and so, yeah. I mean, I guess it could be exactly like that. Just it even almost makes it more fun if I was to just incorporate it overtly and say I would be writing a narrative inspired directly by the Fern Gully film that was less, more gritty, that was dealing more with the interpersonals and the more adult character themes, but a similar type thing. Hexus was cool as fuck. So yeah, I could see that occurring. Yeah. But the moment of choosing has arrived.
Yes.
I choose the bees.
You choose the bees, eh?
I choose the bees.
I did not expect that. All right. I will circle that, and I'll have to think. I got to find the the best way to do that, where it's not going to be so boring and just like an entomological, book or something. I'm kind of torn. If because I like all three of yours, because they all are reminiscent of things from my younger years. I think of Piers Anthony with the Gift Finders.
Mm-hmm.
I think of our college and Peter Nazareth with the young girl being taught magic, and then of course the Tree People Fern Gully story.
Yeah.
So I really loved Fern Gully. It's a hard choice because I think any of these three would be fun to read. Is the trick. Which do you think would be the easiest to write?
The easiest?
Yeah, didn't you say the young girl was probably the one that you?
I feel like that's the one where I could fit it into the most diverse number of settings and narratives and have it qualify as having come from that prompt.
Okay, so I think I want to go with the Gift Finders.
Okay.
The first one. Because when I think about it, it's like, I've seen Fern Gully, it was fun. Hang on to that idea, we may use it again. But out of the other two, like, I really want more of a universe where there's people with unique gifts that need help finding them. However you write that. So.
Yeah, because as we've said a lot, I like X-Men. I would read, or watch a different cartoon or movie or comic book that was like X-Men, that was as good or comparably good, but just had different characters and a different vision. We are not opposed to derivative story ideas on this channel.
Yeah. And we had a comedy superhero idea that we wanted to work on together at some point, too.
Yeah. I don't know if this will be it, but
yeah.
So, the time of closing... the time of choosing has passed and the time of closing arrives.
You are the weakest link. Get off the island.
Yeah, get off the island. So, for next week, 3,750 words of a yet untitled story about a colony of humans that encounters a terrible pollination problem at their new home base. And 3,750 words of the Gift Finders. And is there anything you want to throw on at the very end here?
No, I think we covered
Pretty
it all.
much got it covered. All right, well then, until we meet again, write well, pens up, and hit that subscribe button, hit the like button down there. Let us know if you've been working on a story, and we hope to see you next time.